Κυρίες και κύριοι, καλημέρα σας. Με ιδιαίτερη χαρά σας καλωσορίζουμε εδώ, στο φιλόξενο χώρο του Μουσείου της Ακρόπολης, που σήμερα γιορτάζει τα 5 χρόνια λειτουργίας του, για να συμμετάσχετε στις εργασίες της ημερίδας με θέμα κοινωνικές ανισότητες στην Ευρώπη. Η ημερίδα πραγματοποιείται στο πλαίσιο της Ελληνικής Προεδρίας του Ευρωπαϊκού Συμβουλίου και συνδιοργανώνεται από τη Γενική Γραμματεία Έρευνας και Τεχνολογίας και τη Γενική Διεύθυνση Έρευνας και Καινοτομίας της Ευρωπαϊκής Επιτροπής. Φορείς φιλοξενίας είναι το Εθνικό Κέντρο Κοινωνικών Ερευνών και το Πάντιο Πανεπιστήμιο, δύο φορείς που υπηρετούν εδώ και πολλά χρόνια σε ερευνητικό και ακαδημαϊκό επίπεδο με εξέχοντα τρόπο τις κοινωνικές και ανθρωπιστικές επιστήμες στην Ελλάδα. Η σημερινή ημερίδα θα επιχειρήσει να προσεγγίσει πολυδιάστατα το φαινόμενο της αύξησης των κοινωνικών ανισοτήτων, που οφείλεται στην τρέχουσα οικονομική κρίση, αλλά όχι αποκλειστικά σε αυτή, απειλώντας σοβαρά την κοινωνική συνοχή, τόσο σε εθνικό όσο και σε ευρωπαϊκό επίπεδο. Παρά την αναπτυξιακή στρατηγική της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, Ευρώπη 2020, που στόχο έχει την επίτευξη μέχρι το 2020 υψηλών επιπέδων απασχόλησης, παραγωγικότητας και κοινωνικής συνοχής, η σημερινή πραγματικότητα εγείρει αμήλικτα ερωτήματα σχετικά με την ικανότητα των εθνικών και ευρωπαϊκών πολιτικών συστημάτων να περιορίσουν τις ανισότητες και να ενισχύσουν την κοινωνική συνοχή. Οι κοινωνικές ανισότητες και οι επιπτώσεις τους στον κοινωνικό ιστό αποτέλεσαν επίσης αντικείμενο σημαντικών ερευνητικών έργων που χρηματοδοτήθηκαν από την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση μέσα από το 7ο Πρόγραμμα Πλαίσιο για την Έρευνα. Τα έργα αυτά υπογράμμισαν την ανάγκη περαιτέρω διερεύνησης του φαινομένου των ανισοτήτων, αλλά και την ανάγκη για νέες πολιτικές που θα αντιμετωπίσουν το πρόβλημα στη ρίζα του. Η ημερίδα για τις κοινωνικές ανισότητες στην Ευρώπη αποτελείται από 4 μέρη, 4 ενότητες. Στο πρώτο μέρος παρουσιάζονται τα συμπεράσματα από σχετικές έρευνες του 7ου Προγράμματος Πλαισίου που προαναφέρθηκαν. Ενώ στη συνέχεια, στις υπόλοιπες 3 ενότητες, οι παρουσιάσεις επικεντρώνονται στην ανάλυση του φαινομένου των κοινωνικών ανισοτήτων σε διαφορετικές θεματικές περιοχές, όπως είναι η εργασία, το εισόδημα, η υγεία, η παιδεία, το βιωτικό επίπεδο, η σχέση των δύο φύλων, καθώς και τα δικαιώματα του παιδιού. Κατά τη διάρκεια των εργασιών της ημερίδας θα συζητηθούν επιπλέον οι κοινωνικές και πολιτικές επιπλοκές που προκύπτουν από την αύξηση των ανισοτήτων, η αποτελεσματικότητα των εφαρμοζόμενων πολιτικών, καθώς και οι μελλοντικοί στόχοι για την καταπολέμησή τους. Παρακαλούμε να σημειώσετε ότι οι παρουσιάσεις θα γίνουν στην αγγλική γλώσσα, ενώ υπάρχει δυνατότητα παράλληλης μετάφρασης στα ελληνικά με τη χρήση ακουστικών. Οι χαιρετισμοί από τους εκπροσώπους φορέων κατά τη διάρκεια της εκδήλωσης, όπως και τυχόν ερωτήσεις από το κοινό, δίνονται να γίνουν και στην ελληνική γλώσσα, δεδομένου ότι η διερμηνία θα είναι διαθέσιμη μέχρι το πέρας της εκδήλωσης. Σας ευχαριστούμε εκ των προτέρων θερμά για τη συμμετοχή σας στην ημερίδα για τις κοινωνικές ανισότητες στην Ευρώπη, η οποία θα ξεκινήσει ευθύς αμέσως με τους χαιρετισμούς από τους διοργανωτές. Παρακαλούμε τον Γενικό Γραμματέα Έρευνας και Τεχνολογίας, κύριο Χρήστο Βασιλάκο, να προσέλθει για να απευθύνει χαιρετισμό.
Κύριε Πρόεδρε, αξιότιμοι καλεσμένοι, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Εκ μέρους της Ελληνικής Προεδρίας του Συμβουλίου της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, είναι τιμή αλλά και χαρά να σας καλωσορίζουμε σήμερα στην εκδήλωση για τις κοινωνικές ανισότητες στην Ευρώπη. Η σημερινή εκδήλωση είναι η 18η και τελευταία εκδήλωση της Ελληνικής Προεδρίας κατά το τρέχον εξάμηνο και θα έλεγα ότι διαφέρει σημαντικά από όλες τις άλλες εκδηλώσεις, καθότι το θέμα είναι μη τεχνολογικό, αλλά είναι ένα θέμα το οποίο αγγίζει τον κοινωνικό ιστό της Ευρώπης και ιδιαίτερα των χωρών εκείνων του Νότου, που έχουν υποστεί σημαντικές πιέσεις τα τελευταία χρόνια της οικονομικής κρίσης. Το Υπουργείο Παιδείας και Θρησκευμάτων, η Γενική Γραμματεία Έρευνας και Τεχνολογίας που υπάγεται σε αυτό, αλλά και τα άλλα όμως συναρμόδια υπουργεία και γενικές γραμματείες, δείχνουν σημαντικό ενδιαφέρον, αλλά και θερμή συμπαράσταση για την κοινωνική έρευνα που αφορά σε ζητήματα όπως είναι οι ανισότητες και ο κοινωνικός αποκλεισμός. Είναι προφανές ότι η κατανόηση της δομής και της δυναμικής των σύγχρονων κοινωνικών ανισοτήτων αποτελούν σήμερα μία από τις μεγαλύτερες προκλήσεις που αντιμετωπίζει η κοινωνικο-οικονομική έρευνα. Με δεδομένη τη χρηματοπιστωτική κρίση της περίοδου που διανύουμε, αλλά και μία κρίση αξιών, η οικονομική αλλά και η κοινωνική ανάπτυξη δεν μπορούν παρά να αποτελέσουν βασικές συνιστώσεις του ευρωπαϊκού κοινωνικού μοντέλου για όλα τα κράτη-μέλη της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης και ιδιαίτερα για τις χώρες του Ευρωπαϊκού Νότου. Βάσει αυτού του σκεπτικού, η ενίσχυση της αναπτυξιακής και κοινωνικής πολιτικής αναγνωρίζεται ως το βασικό εργαλείο της κυβερνητικής παρέμβασης για την άμβλυνση των κοινωνικών ανισοτήτων, τη διασφάλιση της ποιότητας στον τομέα της απασχόλησης και την εγγύηση της ασφάλειας των πολιτών και την προστασία βέβαια της κοινωνικής συνοχής. Συνεπώς, η αντιμετώπιση της φτώχειας και η κοινωνική ενσωμάτωση εμφανίζονται πλέον ως ζητήματα προτεραιότητας στην πολιτική της Ελλάδας αλλά και της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης. Η χάραξη όμως αποτελεσματικής κοινωνικής πολιτικής στο χώρο αυτό φέρνει ξανά στο προσκήνιο την ανάγκη για κατάλληλα και συγκρίσιμα ερευνητικά αποτελέσματα και πληροφορίες. Και εδώ ακριβώς έγκυται η σημασία αλλά και ο ρόλος της κοινωνικής και οικονομικής έρευνας προκειμένου να διαμορφωθούν τεκμηριωμένες πολιτικές σε πανευρωπαϊκό, εθνικό, ακόμα και περιφερειακό επίπεδο. Κατά καιρούς, τα αποτελέσματα που προκύπτουν από τα ερευνητικά προγράμματα της Γενικής Γραμματείας Έρευνας και Τεχνολογίας έχουν ενσωματωθεί στις δημόσιες πολιτικές. Λόγου χάρη, στο πλαίσιο του πρώην επιχειρησιακού προγράμματος Ανταγωνιστικότητα, είχε ενταχθεί η έρευνα για τη φτώχεια, τον κοινωνικό αποκλεισμό και τις ανισότητες, η οποία συνέβαλε σε μια αποτελεσματικότερη άσκηση πολιτικής στην άμβληση των συνεπειών του κοινωνικού αποκλεισμού, στη συνοχή, αλλά και στην ενδυνάμωση της κοινωνικής αλληλεγγύης. Αξίζει να σημειωθεί πλέον ότι στο πλαίσιο του ίδιου προγράμματος Ανταγωνιστικότητα, το Εθνικό Κέντρο Κοινωνικών Ερευνών που φιλοξενεί, που είναι συνδιοργανωτής στην εκδήλωση αυτή και ως εποπτευόμενος φορέας από τη Γενική Γραμματεία Έρευνας και Τεχνολογίας, είχε αναλάβει την υλοποίηση του προγράμματος, δημιουργία κόμβου δευτερογενούς επεξεργασίας και διαχείρισης κοινωνικο-οικονομικών δεδομένων και δικτών, που σε συνδυασμό με το πρόγραμμα Αριστεία στα ερευνητικά πεδία, φτώχεια, αποκλεισμός και κοινωνικές ανισότητες, αναβάθμισαν σημαντικά, ίσως θα έλεγα, το ρόλο της κοινωνικής έρευνας για τη χάραξη της αναπτυξιακής πολιτικής σε νευραλγικούς για την ελληνική κοινωνία τομείς. Στην Ελλάδα, οι δείκτες ανισότητας και αποστέρησης εμφανίζονται να είναι από τους δυσμενέστερους των κρατών μελών της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, σύμφωνα πάντα με τα δεδομένα που έχουμε. Για την αντιμετώπιση των πολλών και πολυδιάστατων προβλημάτων που ανακύπτουν, ιδιαίτερα μάλιστα σε μία περίοδο κρίσης, η Πολιτεία και ιδιαίτερα η Γενική Γραμματεία Έρευνας και Τεχνολογίας διερευνούν τον άριστο συνδυασμό μεταξύ καινοτομίας, τεχνολογικής ανάπτυξης και κοινωνικο-οικονομικής αναπτυξιακής διαδικασίας. Με βάση τα μαθήματα, αλλά και τις εμπειρίες τόσο του παρελθόντος, αλλά και του παρόντος, βάζουμε τα θεμέλια για να διαμορφώσουμε ένα νέο αναπτυξιακό πρότυπο για τη χώρα μας, για την μετά την κρίση περίοδο, όπου η κοινωνική διάσταση θα αποτελεί μία ουσιαστική προϋπόθεση για τη διασφάλιση της κοινωνικής συνοχής και της βελτίωσης της ζωής, της ποιότητας, όχι μόνο των Ελλήνων πολιτών, αλλά γενικά όλων των Ευρωπαίων πολιτών. Κλείνοντας, θα ήθελα να συγχαρώ, αλλά και να ευχαριστήσω θερμά τους διοργανωτές αυτής της πραγματικά σημαντικής, αλλά και ξεχωριστής εκδήλωσης, όπως σας ανέφερα, την Ευρωπαϊκή Επιτροπή, the European Commission, in particular from DG Research and Innovation, το Εθνικό Κέντρο Κοινωνικών Ερευνών, το Πάντιο Πανεπιστήμιο και προφανώς τα στελέχη της Γενικής Γραμματείας Έρευνας και Τεχνολογίας, που πραγματικά έχουν υπερβάλει αυτήν την περίοδο της ελληνικής προεδρίας για τη διοργάνωση όχι μόνο των 18 μεγάλων εκδηλώσεων, αλλά και όλων των δράσεων που αναπτύξαμε σε αυτήν την περίοδο. Τέλος, θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω όλους εσάς για την παρουσία σας και να ευχηθώ κάθε επιτυχία στην εκδήλωση με την πεποίθηση ότι θα συμβάλλει σημαντικά, ουσιαστικά, στην αντιμετώπιση των τόσο σοβαρών φαινομένων ανισοτήτων και κοινωνικών αποκλεισμών που αντιμετωπίζει η σημερινή μας εποχή. Ευχαριστώ πολύ για την προσοχή σας και σας εύχομαι καλή επιτυχία στο συνέδριο.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ, κύριε Βασιλάκο. Και παρακαλείται η Αντιπρίτανης Ακαδημαϊκών Υποθέσεων του Παντίου Πανεπιστημίου να προσέλθει για να απευθύνει χαιρετισμό, μιας και ο Πρίτανης βρίσκεται εκτός Ελλάδος.
Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ. Κύριε Γενική Γραμματέα, κύριε Πρόεδρε, αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, αγαπητοί προσκεκλημένοι, distinguished guests, εκ μέρους του Παντίου Πανεπιστημίου, είναι με μεγάλη χαρά βρίσκομαι σήμερα εδώ για αυτό το πάρα πολύ σημαντικό συνέδριο, το οποίο απευθύνεται σε ένα εκλεκτό κοινό και αντιμετωπίζει τα θέματα του κοινωνικού αποκλεισμού και αναγνωρίζει όλα αυτά τα ζητήματα τα οποία απασχολούν τις ευρωπαϊκές κοινωνίες και ιδίως τις κοινωνίες του Νότου, μεταξύ αυτών και την ελληνική κοινωνία, η οποία βρίσκεται σε κρίση. Τα θέματα αυτά τα αντιμετωπίζει και το Πάντιο Πανεπιστήμιο. Πολλά από τα τμήματά του, τα εργαστήριά του, τα ερευνητικά του κέντρα έχουν ασχοληθεί επιμακρών με τις ευπαθείς ομάδες, με τα αποτελέσματα της οικονομικής κρίσεως, με τα θέματα των παιδιών, των γυναικών, της εργασίας και έχει μια μακρά ιστορία και στον ερευνητικό χώρο και στο διδακτικό χώρο. Είναι θέματα για τα οποία το Πάντιο Πανεπιστήμιο και ως διοίκηση βρίσκεται αντιμέτωπο καθημερινά με τα θέματα αυτά, διότι βλέπουμε συνεχώς ένα αυξανόμενο αριθμό φοιτητών, ο οποίος ζητά να συμπεριληφθεί στα προγράμματα στέγασης και στα προγράμματα σύντησης. Βλέπουμε συνεχώς φοιτητές οι οποίοι δεν έρχονται να πάρουν μέρος στις εξετάσεις, διότι μπαίνουν μέσα στη μεγάλη κατηγορία των εργαζομένων φοιτητών και στις περιόδους τις εξεταστικές φεύγουν γιατί πηγαίνουν στα νησιά για να εργαστούν περιοδικώς, και αντιμετωπίζουμε συνεχώς μία αλλαγή των φοιτητικών καταστάσεων τις οποίες γνωρίζαμε παλιότερα, όλα αυτά απότοκα της μεγάλης κρίσεως. Συνεπώς, είναι με μεγάλο ενδιαφέρον που θα παρακολουθήσουμε τις εργασίες και τα αποτελέσματα του συνεδρίου και γνωρίζουμε και από συναδέλφους Πριτάνης και της Ισπανίας και της Πορτογαλίας και της Ιρλανδίας πόσο βαθύτατα η κρίση έχει κυρίως επηρεάσει και τη ζωή των πανεπιστημίων καθεαυτών, των οποίων οι προϋπολογισμοί έχουν μειωθεί κατά 50%, αλλά και κυρίως των πλέον ευαλώτων κοινωνικών ομάδων των φοιτητών. Εύχομαι καλή επιτυχία στις εργασίες του συνεδρίου και κυρίως θα διαβάσουμε με πάρα πολύ ενδιαφέρον τα πρακτικά όταν θα κυκλοφορήσουν. Σας ευχαριστώ.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ την καθηγήτρια κυρία Ισμήνη Κρυάρη και τώρα καλούμε το Διευθυντή και Πρόεδρο του Διοικητικού Συμβουλίου του Εθνικού Κέντρου Κοινωνικών Ερευνών, καθηγητή Νίκο Δεμερτζή, να πάρει το λόγο. Κύριε Δεμερτζή.
Αξιότιμε κύριε Γενικέ, υψηλοί προσκεκλημένοι, αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, κυρία Αντιπρίτανη, κυρίες και κύριοι. Με ιδιαίτερη χαρά, πραγματικά με ιδιαίτερη χαρά, σας καλωσορίζω στην σημερινή μας ημερίδα για τις κοινωνικές ανισότητες στην Ευρώπη, η οποία, όπως είπε ο κύριος Γενικός, είναι η τελευταία μια σειράς πολλών εκδηλώσεων που έχει διοργανώσει η Γενική Γραμματεία στο πλαίσιο της εκπεριτροπής Προεδρίας της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης. Αλλά θέλω να πιστεύω, όπως και ο ίδιος είπε, ότι ναι, μεν είναι η τελευταία, αλλά δεν είναι η λιγότερο σημαντική. Last but not least. Η σημασία της ημερίδας μας αυτής, αγαπητές κυρίες και κύριοι, αποτυπώνεται σε μερικά ενδεικτικά νούμερα. Περίπου 27 εκατομμύρια άνδρες και γυναίκες σήμερα παραμένουν άνεργοι στα 28 κράτη-μέλη της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, 19 εκατομμύρια εκ των οποίων διαμένουν στις χώρες της Ευρωζώνης. 24% των νέων της Ευρώπης σήμερα είναι άνεργοι. Πολλοί μιλούν για την χαμένη γενιά της Ευρώπης. Εννοείται βεβαίως ότι στον Ευρωπαϊκό Νότο η κατάσταση είναι ακόμα χειρότερη. Σύμφωνα με έγκυρες εκτιμήσεις, εάν παραμείνουν ως έχουν, οι περιοριστικές οικονομικές πολιτικές θα μπορούσαν μέχρι το 2025 να θέσουν υπό την απειλή φτώχειας ακόμα περισσότερο αριθμό Ευρωπαίων πολιτών, περί τα 15 έως και 25 εκατομμύρια περίπου επιπλέον φτωχούς Ευρωπαίους πολίτες, όσο περίπου ο πληθυσμός μαζί της Ολλανδίας και της Αυστρίας. Αυτό θα είχε ως αποτέλεσμα να μιλάμε στο 2025 για 146 εκατομμύρια φτωχούς ή και νεόπτωχους στην Ευρώπη. Παρόλο τον συσσωρευμένο πλούτο στο πλαίσιο της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, η φτώχεια διατηρείται ακόμα σε υψηλά επίπεδα. Σχεδόν ένας στους 7 Ευρωπαίους διακινδυνεύει να περιέρθει σε κατάσταση φτώχειας και βεβαίως η κατάσταση αυτή είναι ακόμα πιο έντονη και ακόμα πιο επισφαλής για ευάλωτες κοινωνικές ομάδες, για παιδιά και τους πιο ηλικιωμένους. Ενώπιον αυτής της εικόνας, θα ήθελα να σας θυμίσω μια εμβληματική φράση που διατύπωσε ο Φράγκλιν Ρούσβελτ στη δεύτερη ενακτήρια ομιλία του προς το αμερικανικό έθνος το 1937. Είπε λοιπόν ο Ρούσβελτ τότε, 20 Ιανουαρίου του 1937, «The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little». Άραγε πώς θα τοποθετούνταν, πώς θα αντιδρούσε ο Ρούσβελτ στην τρέχουσα κατάσταση, όπου στο μεταξύ το 8,4 του παγκόσμιου πληθυσμού ελέγχει το 84,3 του παγκόσμιου πλούτου. Πριν όμως φτάσουμε στην κατάσταση αυτή της πολύ μεγάλης ανισότητας στην παγκόσμια κατανομή του πλούτου, η κατάσταση δεν ήταν πάντα έτσι. Μετά τον Δεύτερο Παγκόσμιο Πόλεμο, οι ανισότητες είχαν συρρικνωθεί σε μεγάλο βαθμό μέσα και από την φορολογική πολιτική και από την πολιτική των μεταβιβαστικών μεταβιβάσεων εισοδημάτων. Ήταν μια περίοδος διεύρυνσης του κράτους πρόνοιας, του κοινωνικού κράτους, το οποίο είχε απλώσει ένα δίκτυο ασφαλείας σε πάρα πολλές κοινωνικές κατηγορίες, ευάλωτες κοινωνικές κατηγορίες, έτσι ώστε να συμμετέχουν και αυτοί στην γενική ευημερία. Τότε ήταν που υπήρχε έλεγχος στην αγορά εργασίας, τότε ήταν που υπήρχε ρύθμιση. Βεβαίως, αυτές οι καταστάσεις σήμερα πλέον θεωρούνται αναχρονιστικές. Μάλιστα, υπάρχουν και εξτρεμιστικές φωνές, θα έλεγα, σύμφωνα με τις οποίες και μόνο η ιδέα της ανακατανομής του πλούτου συνιστά μια ηθική κατεσχήνη και ότι, in quotation marks, anyone who earns $1 million or more should be exempt from all income taxes. Πάντως, είναι ο ίδιος ο ΟΣΑ που το 2012 διαπιστώνει ότι η εισοδηματική ανισότητα στις περισσότερες χώρες έχει αυξηθεί τα τελευταία 30 χρόνια, σε σχέση με τα τελευταία 30 χρόνια, υπό την έννοια ότι η συμμετοχή της εργασίας έχει μειωθεί στο γενικό εθνικό εισόδημα. Αυτό κυρίως οφείλεται στις σύγχρονες τάσεις της χρηματοπιστωτικοποίησης, την ευελιξία και την αυτοματοποίηση της παραγωγής, που εν πολλοίς έχει ως συνέπεια την ανάπτυξη χωρίς απασχόληση, τη λεγόμενη jobless growth. Ειδικά για την Ελλάδα, το 2012, το εισόδημα του 20% του πλουσιότερου 20% του πληθυσμού ήταν 6,5 περίπου φορές μεγαλύτερο από το εισόδημα του 20% του φτωχότερου πληθυσμού της χώρας. Πολύ πρόσφατα, ο Τομά Πικετή, στο πολυδιαφημισμένο και πολυσυζητημένο βιβλίο του, Capital in the 21st Century, διαπιστώνει ότι το χάσμα μεταξύ πλουσίων και φτωχών σε παγκόσμιο επίπεδο έχει επιστρέψει στα επίπεδα που ήταν κατά την περίοδο του Πρώτου Παγκοσμίου Πολέμου. Και τούτο διότι μεταξύ άλλων παρατηρείται στο πλαίσιο του χρηματοπιστωτικού καπιταλισμού μια σοβαρή απόκλιση ανάμεσα στο βαθμό μεγέθυνσης της οικονομίας και στην απόδοση του κεφαλαίου. Σήμερα πλέον πολλοί στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, ακόμη και η Κριστίν Λαγκάρτ του Νομισματικού Ταμείου, σε πρόσφατη ομιλία της σε συνάντηση στο Νταβός το 2013, αναγνωρίζουν ότι η μείωση και η καταπολέμηση της ανεργίας και η αύξηση των ρυθμών ανάπτυξης είναι απόλυτης προτεραιότητας προκειμένου να μειωθούν οι εισοδηματικές ανισότητες και να ενισχυθεί το κοινωνικό κεφάλαιο και η κοινωνική εμπιστοσύνη. Πόσο μάλλον που οι εισοδηματικές ανισότητες, που εκτός από τις εισοδηματικές ανισότητες υπάρχουν και άλλου τύπου ανισότητες, διαφορές και διακρίσεις στις κοινωνίες μας, στην υγεία, την εκπαίδευση, στις επικοινωνίες, τόσο σε διαγενειακό όσο σε ενδογενειακό επίπεδο, τόσο μεταξύ των κρατών μελών της Ένωσης, όσο και εντός ενός εκάστοτε εξ αυτών. Συνεπώς, κυρίες και κύριοι, η αξία της σημερινής ημερίδας μας είναι αυταπόδεικτη. Υπόθηκε και προηγουμένως άλλωστε. Το ΕΚΕ, ως υποστηρικτικός φορέας στη διοργάνωση της ημερίδας αυτής, έχει να επιδείξει μακρά παράδοση στη μελέτη των κοινωνικονομικών ανισοτήτων, καθώς και στη συνεργασία του με την πολιτεία για την χάραξη κατάλληλων πολιτικών, προκειμένου αυτές να αντιμετωπιστούν αποτελεσματικά. Επιτρέψτε μου ενδεικτικά να αναφέρω ότι τα τελευταία χρόνια το ΕΚΕ συστηματικά παρακολουθεί και αξιολογεί ένα εύρος ερευνητικών αντικειμένων που σχετίζονται άμεσα ή έμεσα με τις εισοδηματικές και κοινωνικές ανισότητες. Το έργο του αυτό έχει αποτυπωθεί στις δραστηριότητες του Παρατηρητηρίου για την Κοινωνική Οικονομία, καθώς και στο Κοινωνικό Πορτρέτο της Ελλάδας, μια περιοδική έκδοση, στην οποία αποτυπώνονται δείκτες ανισότητας, δείκτες φτώχειας, κατανομή εισοδήματος και ούτω καθεξής. Έτσι λοιπόν, εκτός από την παράδοση που έχει στην έρευνα για την πολιτική κουλτούρα, τις αστικές και ανθρωπολογικές μελέτες, έχει αναπτύξει σημαντικότατη τεχνογνωσία στα θέματα του κοινωνικού αποκλεισμού, του κράτους πρόνοιας, των προβλημάτων στην οικογένεια, των προβλημάτων στην νεολαία, κοινωνικής πολιτικής όσον αφορά τις ευάλωτες ομάδες, την αγορά εργασίας και ούτω καθεξής. Θέματα δηλαδή που άπτονται ευθέως με τις συστηματικές της σημερινής ημερίδας. Τη στιγμή αυτή τρέχουν 3 σχετικά ερευνητικά προγράμματα, ενώ μόλις πολύ πρόσφατα ολοκληρώθηκε ένα 4ο. Κυρίες και κύριοι, τελειώντας, θα ήθελα να πω ότι η ημερίδα αυτή έχει ουσιαστικό νόημα στο μέτρο που οι διαπιστώσεις και τα πορίσματά της θα χρησιμοποιηθούν ή τέλος πάντων με κάποιον τρόπο θα ληφθούν υπόψη από φορείς που λαμβάνουν τις αποφάσεις σε εθνικό και ευρωπαϊκό επίπεδο. Και τούτο διότι είναι επιτυχημένη μια οικονομική και κοινωνική πολιτική όταν στηρίζεται σε τεκμηριωμένες προτάσεις και σχέδια δημόσιων πολιτικών. Με την ευκαιρία θα ήθελα να ευχηθώ καλή επιτυχία λοιπόν στις εργασίες της ημερίδας αυτής και από μεριάς του ΕΚΕ να ευχαριστήσω για άλλη μια φορά όλους τους συντελεστές που με αμέριστη φροντίδα συνέβαλαν στη διοργάνωσή της. Μεταξύ αυτών θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω την κυρία Κοσμά, την κυρία Γυπαράκη, την κυρία Πατρώνη, την κυρία Βαβάση, την κυρία Λοβέρδου, που όλοι μαζί πολύ ωραία συνεργαστήκαμε. Ευχαριστώ επίσης όλους τους συζητητές και ιδιαίτερα τους συναδέλφους που ήρθαν από το εξωτερικό. Φυσικά, πάνω από όλους, θέλω να ευχαριστήσω εσάς προσωπικά για την παρουσία σας και για το έμπρακτο ενδιαφέρον σας. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ τον κύριο Δεμερτζή και στη συνέχεια θα παρακολουθήσουμε βιντεοσκοπημένο μήνυμα του Επιτρόπου Απασχόλησης Κοινωνικών Υποθέσεων και Κοινωνικής Ένταξης, καθηγητή Λάσλο Αντόρ.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the Greek presidency for organizing this conference on social inequalities in Europe. It is a great opportunity to discuss the findings of the different research projects on social inequalities funded under the EU's 7th Framework Programme for Research. The European Commission has been very much aware of growing income inequalities and has supported a number of initiatives aimed at examining this development and finding policy solutions. The Gini project is one good example. It was launched in 2010 within the framework of FP7 and has provided us with a comprehensive picture of the various forms of inequality over the last 30 years and of their social impact. Another example was the high-level conference on inequalities in Europe and the future of the welfare state, which the Commission organized in December 2011. Since then, the Eurozone crisis produced record high level of unemployment and rising poverty in a number of member states. Social cohesion in Europe is now at great risk, and there is increasing awareness among policymakers of the implications of social inequality. It is with good reason that in the United States, President Obama has warned that the combined trends of increased inequality and decreasing social mobility pose a fundamental threat to the American dream. Pope Francis has likewise warned about an economy of exclusion, where a culture of prosperity leaves some people behind. Over the past years, interesting reports on the dangers of inequality have been produced by the IMF, the OECD, and many other reputable organizations. Indeed, rising inequality is not only a question of social justice, but it threatens global financial stability, democracy, and the realization of human rights. With his recent bestseller, Capital in the 21st Century, Thomas Piketty has further encouraged the debate on the role and meaning of wealth, wealth inequality, and the taxation of wealth. This debate has been long in coming and needs to happen now. Ladies and gentlemen, the challenge of rising inequality needs to feature more prominently on our political agenda. Concrete solutions are needed. Well-designed and targeted policies play an important role in reducing inequality, while we know there is no quick fix to this problem. Inequalities are now closely monitored in the context of the European semester with the aim of strengthening the social dimension of the EMU. This year, the European Commission's country-specific recommendations to the Member States focused on poverty and social exclusion more than ever before. For example, the recommendation that the tax burden on low-income labor should be lowered has been widely accepted and is clearly connected also to Europe's employment and poverty targets for 2020. However, shifting taxation towards capital gains, property and wealth more generally is still not a message that is popular politically. The Commission has put forward a number of practical initiatives, such as a financial transaction tax and an action plan on tackling tax avoidance. But unfortunately, it still remains politically easier to increase consumption taxes than to achieve pan-European agreement on the FTT or to effectively implement concrete steps in the fight against tax evasion and avoidance. Good intentions are therefore not enough. Today's conference on social inequalities in Europe will hopefully help deepen our understanding of the nature of the problem, on the setbacks, and on the progress made in tackling inequalities over recent years. But most importantly, I hope that it will also help find consensus on the most effective solutions. Remember that we will not be judged on the declarations we have made, but on the results we have achieved. I wish you a fruitful conference, and I look forward to learning about its outcome. Thank you very much for your attention.
Θα προχωρήσουμε τώρα στο πρώτο μέρος της ημερίδας, στο οποίο η καθηγήτρια Γιούτα Αλμεντιγκέρ, πρόεδρος του Κέντρου Κοινωνικών Επιστημών του Βερολίνου, θα μας παρουσιάσει κάποια από τα συμπεράσματα που προέκυψαν από τις έρευνες με αντικείμενο τις κοινωνικές ανισότητες που υλοποιήθηκαν με χρηματοδότηση από το 7ο πρόγραμμα πλαίσιο της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης. Το πρώτο μέρος θα συντονίσει ο αναπληρωτής καθηγητής στο Τμήμα Κοινωνικής Πολιτικής του Παντίου Πανεπιστημίου, κύριος Χρήστος Μπάγκαβος. Παρακαλώ τον κύριο Μπάγκαβο και την κυρία Αλμέντιγκερ να έρθουν στο βήμα.
You have this one, presentation and
I will just introduce you, that's all, okay?
Okay, no, the PowerPoint.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Καλημέρα και από μένα. Ευχαριστώ τους διοργανωτές για την σημαντική εκδήλωση. Θα είμαι πάρα πολύ σύντομος. Βασικά θα δώσω το λόγο στην κυρία Αλμεντάγκερ, την οποία την ευχαριστήσουμε πάρα πολύ, στην καθηγήτρια, και θα επακολουθήσει μια συζήτηση μετά την παρουσίασή της. You have the floor. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. I have no idea what you said, so I really trust that it was nothing bad.
I have just introduced yourself.
Well, it always depends. So thank you very, very much for inviting me to talk here. It's a wonderful venue. I've never talked in such a wonderful place. And I had a very hard time deciding that I really will speak here and not walk around and look at those most beautiful things. The timing of this conference could not be better. Since weeks, Thomas Piketty, and he has been referred to a couple of times, has been mentioned ever and ever. He really hit the charts. And indeed, he already made some difference, indeed, at least in Germany. The difference, however, is not that we now introduced taxes on wealth. The difference is that our Minister for Social Affairs and Labor decided that I should work on wealth. And she told me this in length yesterday, and I said, well, I mean, we have bad data on wealth, that's true. But shouldn't we rather work on other things like poverty and how poverty relates to deprivation scores and things like this? But Piketty really sort of made very clear to our minister that wealth is now the issue. So there are some outcomes of this book which in a way are very good for the social sciences because they are helpful. They show that social sciences have their place. And on the other hand, they lead to political decisions which are apolitical in a way because I do not think that they actually address the major problem. We have also seen, and this is a second thing which already has been referred to, that within the framework 7, a couple of very, very interesting research programs has been launched, and they have telling names: Gusto, Medea, and Gicini. And the names, I mean, there is something behind those names. It's not just that those are good names. And I very much hope that this conference will contribute, that this research, which is much broader than what Thomas Piketty has written about, will also see a wide audience and will also reach politicians. And just listening to all of you who have introduced this conference and listening to the commissioner, I'm hopeful that they will find the way. They have been published very, very well, but they should not just be published for academics, but also for the wider audience. Over the last couple of months, I can tell, I read carefully through all those results which have been reached in those big Framework 7 programs. Given that the leaders and a couple of people who worked and made their hands dirty working within those programs, I'm not summarizing all those results. Instead, I decided to do two things. I will look at 3 major pillars of social inequality: at education, and at employment, and at income. I will show you how those 3 pillars are linked, and I will organize this short talk around questions on whether social inequality matters on a macro level, on a micro level, and most importantly, and probably not enough discussed, on the macro-micro link, which you all remember has been put forward by the also famous book by Wilkinson and Pickett. If we ask ourselves whether social inequality matters at a macro level of analysis, there are clear answers. There are at least 3 clear answers who all point in the same direction. The first answer is given by Stieglitz, who noted several times, and the last article was published in 2013, that an unequal distribution of income reduces aggregate demand and limits economic growth. Poor people have too little money to consume much, and rich people have too much money to make up for poor people's low consumption. So it reduces growth. The second argument is that high social inequality also means that you have a huge potential within societies and regions you don't make use of. So you have people who have the ability to be educated and to be trained very well, but who are not given the possibility to educate and train themselves. So you have a lost potential, and this means that you have a decrease in productivity you could have. So we deny resources to people, we destroy, in a way, human capital which is there, and therefore we destroy or don't make possible growth. The third argument, it's quite easy and very obvious. It makes a point that high degree of social inequality needs higher growth than countries with lower inequality to be able to reduce poverty. So if you have a quite unequal society and you have a certain amount of growth, then it takes much longer to reach the poor compared to a society which is more equally distributed in terms of resources, primarily in terms of income. We may summarize on this macro level of societal evidence that high inequality is bad for poverty, that high inequality is very bad for poverty reduction, and that high inequality is bad for economic growth. Now, moving from this macro level to the micro level, and when we talk about education and employment and individual income development and access to income, we mostly are on an individual level. We are actually not really talking about income inequality. We are primarily talking on whether or not those people have enough social capital, human capital, if they have enough education, if they have access to employment, if they have enough money to live from. So it's much more an absolute level and not a relative perspective we are focusing at. And this is very important for me to distinguish those different levels to look at. A relational level, which you usually have by looking at Gini coefficients, for example, and absolute levels. This is when you look at whether or not people can live from what they have, or whether they have a minimum education, if you allow me that word. I'm now going through a couple of figures which I wanted to show you, and due to cross-country whatever distractions, due to whatever the soccer tournament or whatever you may now call it, you can easily have access to this PowerPoint, but I will now condense this PowerPoint and just give you the major results. So, but please feel free, and whenever I have your email, you will see that what I'm telling you now is right in a way that I can show it to you empirically. So I'm not telling you narratives which are not based in empirical evidence. Let me start, as I said, with a life course perspective and look at education. In the last couple of years, it has always been claimed that we reached at a European level something like a saturation, so that we can't do more for people with a low education. I would not go with this argument. we still have, just looking at certificates, many, many people who have no basic education, which means that they don't have the minimal certificate the country grants, or that they don't have a diploma, if you want to use this term. We have around 10% in Germany, we have a little bit lower in Finland and in Denmark with 7%, but those are still too much. And we have many more in other countries. We have 41% of a country like in Cyprus, which does not have, give the people the basic education. And without basic education, there's nothing. It's not just that you don't have access to employment and income. It's also a problem for health. It's a problem for being included in a society, and we all know that. We made a lot of progress in terms of tertiary education. And many countries increased their percentage of people with tertiary education up to 40 or 45%, which may be a good sign. Other countries, and my own country included, refuses to increase the number of people with tertiary education to such a high extent. The basic claim is that we should train people much more to be able to be occupationally qualified, which means that we give them apprenticeship training. And this is done on a middle level of education and not on this tertiary level. So in Germany, for example, we have a quota of 27%, which have this tertiary education. So still, and again, the difference between the European Union in terms of levels of education varies a lot. This cannot only be shown in looking at certificates or diplomas. The same result shows if you look at competencies. And competencies are usually, linked to the PISA scores, or since a couple of months, we now have PIAAC, which shows you the competence development for the people aged between 16 and 65. Looking at those competence levels, you again see that there is nothing but a saturation. The number of, and this is now the PISA language, functionally illiterate people amounts to close to 20% in my country, in Germany. So we have 9% without diploma. So those are, in my terminology, certificate poor people. But we have close to 20% which are competence poor. And we have many more men than women in this desperate competence level. Other countries do a much better job. So it does not mean that you have to have such a high percentage. You can reduce the number with a good educational system. And by now we know what makes up a good educational system. The number of competence low people down to 5%. And this is what not just Scandinavian countries reach. Many other countries reach this as well. And we have to work on this. What is really now driving me around, and in a way discouraging me even, is that if you look at those two different measures of education, it's a measure of certificates and it's a measure of competencies. The correlation is not very high. So you have some countries in which you have many people with a tertiary degree, and at the very same time, you have very low percentages of people with high competencies. This means that if you hire now, if I would hire you, and I know you have all those certificates, and I thought, well, great, so I don't have to screen you, I trust your certificates. As an employer, I could make huge mistakes, because behind your certificates, I don't think that this is true in your case, because behind your certificates there's nothing, basically. And you find this looking at those different countries. And we have to discuss this matter, and it is not discussed enough in the literature, what it means for our power relations. So who decides what? Does it mean, you know, that schools and universities lost their power to fuel or to link people to jobs? So much for education. Summing up, we need to have more efforts within nations, but across Europe, to reduce the number of educationally poor. And we have to watch much more closely than we do by now this drifting apart between competencies and diplomas. We look at one indicator much more than we look at the other indicator, and we hardly ever look at the poor correlation between those two indicators. And it may well be that we have this huge expansion in certificates due to all those benchmarks which we send out to our member states, saying, you are a good country if you reach those 30% of tertiary educated people. So much the story for education. I now move to employment. Of course, there is one big thing when we talk about employment, and it has been referred to a couple of times, and this is youth unemployment, which in my terminology is the connection between school and employment and the transition between school and employment. I worked a lot on this, and I just want to really give you one message with you. It's not just looking at unemployment. Unemployment, youth unemployment, is in a way the smaller part of the story. We also have to look at inactivity. And in some nations, those people who are inactive in their youth, because they don't even try to find employment anymore, need to be included in our picture. So this needs, not in employment, not in training, and not in education, is the right way to look at this problem. And it did not really get, at least to German politicians, who always talk about unemployment and not at inactivity rates. The second thing which bothers me is that if you look at employment and think, or in sort of state that people who are in education are well off, this is not always the case. In Germany, we by now have 350,000 people who are in some sort of education. But it's not within the normal educational system. It's because unemployed young people we give to some temporary educational system, which is not bad in itself, but it gives you another story. Those are not people who really made it, who are still in the traditional educational system, going to universities and things like this. So I think that even that this needs statistics, not in employment, education, and training, is some sort of progress. We have to look much more carefully what those people do when they are in education, and don't sum up people who are on very, very different tracks. We should also not say, and by now I'm asked from many, many people from many, many different countries to talk about this famous German vocational training system. I'm not sure whether this is the very best way to go. There are other countries like Austria and like Denmark who started with this vocational training system, this dual system where you both have contact with the labor market and you are at school. But they transposed it to a basic university training, or they transposed it such that they give you first a more general training, a broader training, which is much more suited for lifelong education. And we can, if you are interested in this, I can send you many papers which I have written on that, and we can also talk about it. I don't have the time to expand this now. Looking at employment rates, we see quite diverse directions when we look at the member states. In some member states, employment rates go up. In some other countries, like in yours, they are reduced dramatically, actually. But again, looking at employment rates does not tell you much. It gives you, of course, an idea how many people are sort of included and have some sort of employment. But then you have to look at the quality of employment. And there you see that countries who include a lot of poorly educated people give those people only bad jobs. And bad jobs are transitory jobs, are jobs which are 5 hours a week or something like this. Jobs that don't give you any security and whatsoever. And I did some research on this, and it's very interesting to see country patterns such that you have one country who only gives employment to 50% of the population, but the employment then is good work, and you see other countries who give employment to 80 or 85% of a population, but most of this employment is sort of bad work. So be careful, not just looking at employment rates. And again, I think that this should be much more included in our general statistics. Of course, and I already indicated this, employment is not distributed equally across all groups. We have countries which exclude people without education and training. Germany is a country which does not give employment to poorly educated people. No way. So if we look at the difference between people which have a medium education and a high education compared to people with a low education, you don't see, in terms of employment, any differences between medium and tertiary education. They're doing equally well in Germany, but those who are doing really poor are people without training. So when Germans say we don't have and we do not want to increase the proportion of tertiary trained, they are right looking at employment, because all those people with this middle educational training are employed very well. They're right. In other nations, you see that people without much education and without training are in the labor market, but with consequences that are mostly bad in terms of the jobs they have. So again, we need to look who actually is employed and the percentage who gets employment. In this story, I could now not just tell for education, but of course also for women. Women employment rose steadily in all countries over the last centuries, and in particular the last decades. But in terms of the type of employment, men and women do very, very different work. So summing up, employment as well, don't look just at employment rate, look at the type of work they do, look at the specific ways people with low certificates and low competencies are excluded, and look at the interaction between education, gender, migration background in particular, and employment. I now move to income. And first of all, and this is something you all know, and in Germany as in other countries, we have this huge debate now that the level of mean gross earnings differs widely. I mean, it differs from, in Denmark, we have 55,000 euro a year, and in Bulgaria, we have 5,000 euro a year as a mean gross income. So, I mean, there are huge differences. and given that we do not have a common social policy, this creates pressure, and this also creates, even in Germany, aggression against a joint Europe. Now, of course, as is the case for employment, we have, again, huge differences in terms of income. So income is stratified by education, and now, interestingly enough, I follow this German path. We now see huge differences between people who have this vocational training and people who are tertiary trained. So I think it's cynical if Germans all the time say, well, this academic training is of the same worth as vocational training, because somebody with a tertiary training over the entire life makes more than 100,000 euro more than a person who is, sorry, this was more than 800,000 euros more over the entire life course compared to a person who only has a vocational training. So we should really reconsider that this tertiary training is something which we should not follow. In other countries as well, you see huge differences. What is very interesting in this regard are Scandinavian countries, because in Scandinavian countries you do not see any returns to education. So people with low education make more or less the same compared to people with high education, which is of course interesting, because you usually say people are only interested in investing in education when education pays off and if they can expect a higher income. In some countries, this is not the case. And I looked for literature explaining this, and I didn't really find it. But as you know, Scandinavian countries have an overall good educational system, a very good educational system, without linking this educational system to those income rewards. In terms of gender, just one remark. In most countries, we focus on the gender wage gap, which is of course an important measure we should look at, no doubt about that. But much more important is to look at lifetime income. And if you look at lifetime income of women compared to men, then of course inequality is much, much higher than those 20% we talk and look at a gender wage gap. So we really should switch from this wage gap, or include to a wage gap indicator, a lifetime income indicator, or look at least at pension differences, which are tremendously high in most countries. But in some countries, they also are not. Now, I probably conclude this with moving from income as sort of personal income to the income distribution, which means looking at Gini, and just very few remarks on that. It is not true that we have in Europe a development that in all countries the Gini coefficient increases, or that social inequality increases. We have countries where the Gini coefficient over the last couple of years also decreases. The same applies to poverty, which is of course a relational measure. Again, we have countries in which the poverty rate increases and some in which it decreases. The poverty measure creates more and more problems, I have to admit, for the way I look at those developments. Because if you look at deprivation and compare deprivation, so do people have enough to live from? Do people have access to resources other people have access to? Then those deprivation rates are quite different from poverty rates, and it actually goes in both directions. So you have countries in which the poverty rate is very low, but the deprivation rate is very high, and we still focus on poverty rather than on deprivation. And so I'm really making the case here that we should pay much more attention, and the recent study in Great Britain did this, to look at deprivation, because it tells us more about what people have in terms of resources they need. It does not mean to drop poverty, because your relational standing to the entire society is very important for many, many reasons as well. But we disregard people who really do not have the basic things they need, but are not poor. And this, of course, relates to our discussion between working poor and those people who have low wages. And those are very, very different groups in most countries. Having said this, I can move now to the third point, to the macro level of analysis. And probably I state it like this. Excuse me. It's a link between the macro and the micro level of analysis. And probably allow me to state it like this. It basically says that if I would move as a German citizen, as I stand here with my education, with my income, with my health, to Finland, which is a society which is much more equal than the German society, my health would be better. I would be more happy. I would trust more in the society and all those things. And you remember all the many dimensions Wilkinson and Pickett have stated. We find a lot of empirical evidence on this. But this empirical evidence is based on associations. It's based on correlations. We do not have a lot of causal evidence that this is really true. So this means that we have to work more on appropriate data which need to be longitudinal data and that allow us to work with multi-methods and multi-links, with completely different methods than with correlations. So I have really doubts whether all those hypotheses which have been stated are correct, such that you can make those causal evidences. And we have to work in this regard much more, because it's in a way in the heart, in one of the many hearts of the question, whether inequality matters. If we could make this point, if we really could support this Wilkinson-Pickett point, then we would have reached a lot. Summing up, as I have shown, and I think there is no dispute about that, if you look at the macro level, inequality indeed matters a lot. If you look at individual developments, at education, employment, and income, the individual standing also matters a lot. We do not really know whether the entire inequality of a country matters as much as well, but of course it matters if you have a poor education or if you have a high education. And of course it matters whether you have good employment or bad employment. No question about that. In terms of this macro-micro link, we have to invest more work. Second, as I have shown, we need in a couple of dimensions better indicators, and we have to look much closer how different indicators behave to each other rather than having one indicator standing next to the other indicator. This also means that we cannot only, and this is now of course a point which Colin will make extensively, and I'm very much with him, we cannot talk about activation without giving people the possibility to access education. This will increase inequality, and activation policies will lead to an increase in inequality and not to a decrease. And we cannot walk through even more marketization without talking about the quality of employment and without giving, at the very same time, the European Union a social dimension and not just a market dimension. And my very last point is that in looking at inequality, we should not just look at income. Income is very important, and the security in income is very important. But we also look at the division of time. We forget this time dimension. We have now a discussion, a broad discussion, which says everybody who in the age between 20 and 65 or 70 should work full-time. We never have had a society like this, where everybody works full-time. And I cannot imagine such a society. And I would very much wish that in talking about inequality, that we also think about in which kind of society, in terms of the distribution of time, we wish to live. Thank you very much for your attention.
So I will speak in English for not having a problem with that. Thank you very much for your presentation. There will be discussion time, so we will have a first round of questions. Probably I can ask people if they can ask something in English, could be easier for our guest speaker. Dimitri?
Hello, this is Kyropoulos, University of Athens. Thank you, Professor Almendinger, for this bird's eye view situation. With regard to income, employment, and education, two quick questions. I noticed you talked about good and bad work, but you didn't refer to precarious work. Is this something you use in your own research, or you distrust the term? And is this true that indeed over the last few years, as the crisis evolves, precarious work has increased in terms of the job posts available, particularly to young people? And the second question, research in the United States, as you very well know, has shown that there is another income gap between the, let's say, extremely rich and the rich. And that is the result of policies which have favored the extremely rich people versus the just rich people. Is there research in the European Union that goes along those lines? Do we have evidence of such a gap in the European Union? Thank you.
Άλλο ερώτημα, έχουμε μία-δύο ερωτήσεις. Αν υπάρχουν και άλλα ερωτήματα για να απαντήσει, όλες μαζί η Γιούτα. I have a question also. I mean, I'm thinking about this link between micro and macro level, and I was just wondering, at least in Greece, there's a very interesting issue related to household dimension. I mean, look at the employment issues related to household distribution and to number of people having a job or not in terms of household. I mean, the reference is not the individual, it's not the micro level, but is the private households. Do you plan or do you have some research on that, looking at the employment as related to the number of people having an employment, but really at the level of households? Because most of the time now, for instance, you have data on Eurostat based on household characteristics and not only on individual characteristics. Do you have something on that? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitri. This is a very good question on how to distinguish bad work and precarious work. I show you this in a break. I mean, the way we distinguish this is that we now look at standard employment, which is defined by at least 35 hours a week, and those are fixed contracts, permanent contracts. Then we have substantial part-time, then marginal part-time, then fixed-term part-time, fixed-term employment, and things like this. So, and you see pictures, you know, they are very colorful, and in a way very telling in terms of looking at different educational attainment and looking at gender and looking at age and things like this. If we talk about precarious, then it means that we have to relate this to the question, how long is a state in which you have those small hours or short hours of work? Is this for a year only or for months only, or is this a thing you have to work with for years, or it's the only possibility you can enter the labor market at all? And we do not have good data on this yet. Due to a couple of problems we have with the EU Silk data, as you know, and I think that we have to now define how those different status, like the status of part-time and full-time and fixed and permanent contracts in the middle and long run develop in a life course perspective. So we really need good panel data on that, and then make up our mind on how precisely to define this. In terms of wealth, and you know this at least as good as I do, the data is much worse than in terms of income, and it has in one indicator for how bad the situation is that we, if you look at wealth, I mean, we probably look primarily at whether you own housing, and this makes up a huge proportion of wealth. I don't want to go into details on that, but it's indeed one direction we have to put more efforts in. With housework, I'm not sure whether I understood this question correctly, but you pointed at something which drives me around a lot. We have, not just in Germany, but throughout Europe, this phenomenon of assortative mating. So academics marry academics, and poorly educated people marry poorly educated people. This has not always been the case. In particular for women, it was a wonderful way to upward mobility if they got married by their boss. But bosses don't want to marry women without education anymore. This is what all my panel study of young women show, and this changed, and men also do not want, and women do not want to marry if they have a high education. Women in particular have no interest whatsoever to marry poorly educated men. This, I mean, you smile about this, but this is of utmost importance for inequality research, because it means that all resources come twice. So I married Sue, and we have now this big income. You work full-time, I work full-time. We have a good income, and we compare ours now. So the social divide, summing up individuals' incomes or individual resources to household resources, gets larger and larger. So looking just at individuals doesn't really tell the entire story. If you look at households, inequality is much higher than in looking at individuals only. And if you then know that, of course, the education of the children is patterned by household income and household resources, then you see that not just the mobility within a life course, but also intergenerational mobility is it's extremely, patterned by that. So we see a decrease of intergenerational mobility just due to this assortative mating. Just looking at you, this was not your question.
No,
but
it's okay.
Okay. Then skill mismatch. This problem with skill mismatch has a lot to do of how you measure skills. If you measure skills with diplomas or certificates, you can see that some countries really train a lot of people and gives them a tertiary degree, and those people don't have the possibility to access those jobs. If you look at this, then you can see, and this indeed is a problem, because we standardize educational indicators over the entire European Union, and we say that for all member states, a certain amount of people with tertiary degree should be accomplished. But some labor markets in Europe look quite different from other labor markets in Europe. So I don't think that we should have the same standards for educational attainment for the entire European Union. This is not the right way to have this standardized method. So indeed, in some parts of Europe, you have this skill mismatch in this direction, that you have people with high skills who only find jobs which don't need those skills, but you have this skill mismatch also in another direction. Sorry, I wanted to look at her. This is a problem. You also have, of course, a skill mismatch in the other direction, that you need people with high skills because you have a lot of jobs which need high skills, and then you have to do this retraining on the job, which is not always very easy, or you have to find people from other countries which you then employ in their own country. And this is another broad discussion, because we still do not have ways that we make educational certificates comparable, really.
Υπάρχει κάποιο ερώτημα ακόμη? Παρακαλώ.
Migrating to Germany, and whether we have compensation. Germany doesn't spend resources on training of those highly skilled people, since they're able to attract them from elsewhere.
Just on the same issue, just one question for clarification. My name is Frank van den Broek, University of Leuven. Did you mean to imply that the German strategy continuing to emphasize this very successful secondary education system and not going so much for further or for development of tertiary education, do you imply that that is not sustainable in the long term for Germany?
Probably related to brain drain issues in any case. Okay. Sorry. Ακόμη μία-δύο ερωτήσεις, γιατί μετά από αυτό θα κλείσουμε, γιατί ο χρόνος έχουμε ξεπεράσει λίγο το όριο. Παρακαλώ. Εσείς. Δεν σας ακούμε όμως. Δεν σας ακούμε.
This will be the last one. Sophia Ayala from Oxfam, Great Britain. for deprivation at this point?
Thank
you. First, to this question of skill mismatch and the different measures of education, I found it quite intriguing that if you look at competencies, then you also see that people with high competencies have higher income and people with low competencies have a lower income. So this is nothing which I so much expected. But we do not have enough research given that we have those PIAAC data not long enough. We only have the first round on that. In terms of the question, what's going on in Germany, you first have to see that we have a lot of demographic pressure, and this is puts also pressure on this apprenticeship system, because more and more people want to attain the highest level of schooling and then want to move to universities. And the German industry is lamenting about this a lot, because they don't have the populations they need to be trained for those manufacturing jobs. This, however, could be easily solved if we would simply move our vocational training system, so this dual training system, one step further and install it at a level of colleges. And this is the direction which Denmark and Switzerland and other countries took. The resistance is quite high, but I think it's primarily an institutional resistance, because Germany is not prepared to this demographic change. So we have to work on this. This is not to say that we do not need those qualifications being given in this vocational training system. It just means that we have to reorganize this, and this refers very nicely to this question about sustainability. We see that our vocational training system is not very sustainable in the long run, because it doesn't give you access to further education. It's way too specific. We have 350 different vocational training tracks for different occupations, and this is way too small. I mean, we need to have a broader education where you then could access further education to it. And this is something which other countries have done as well. The European qualification framework is a wonderful idea in principle, but if you look at it in praxis, it is not very well implemented. So we have to work on this implementation, and we also have to work on the question how qualifications need to differ according to the regions where we talk about. But my first point is much more important. I mean, if you are trained as a medical doctor in Estonia, for example, and this is an example which I have now just studied, it took you 4 years until you got, you know, the acceptance that this person can actually work as a medical doctor in Germany, although you have a very good agreement here. So it simply doesn't work out yet, and we have to work more on this. Now, this question on poverty is always relational. Poverty is always, you know, measured on a household level and then in relation to others. When I talk about looking at deprivation, then it's an absolute measure. And of course, we have measures which actually are around since quite a long time, who define this deprivation multidimensionally. So it's a deprivation whether you can have a washing machine, whether you have enough to eat, whether you have access to health care, and things like this. And I think that we need to have both things at the same time.
Thank you. Ευχαριστούμε. Νομίζω ότι υπάρχει ένα μικρό διάλειμμα που ακολουθεί, σύντομο, για να προλάβουμε τους χρόνους. Ευχαριστούμε πολύ.